A warm welcome to all of you. A warm welcome above all to you, Anab. Thank you so much for being with us here today. All of our staatskantine lunchtime events are special, but this one is very special indeed. As you all already know, and as you'll find out, Anab Jain is one of the most original thinkers and doers of our time, and we're really grateful that you're spending this time with us today. Us, that's everyone here, over 30 civil servants from all levels of government, as well as a handful of others from government adjacent organizations. Welcome to all of you. We're delighted that you're here. And us, that's also Staatslabor, your hosts today. We're a not-for-profit government innovation lab. We support the Swiss public sector in becoming bolder, more collaborative, and more open, so that it can effectively serve the common good in these somewhat tumultuous times. I'm Danny Berkeley. I'm a co-director and co-founder of Staatslabor, and I have the pleasure of facilitating today's conversation, but I'm not alone. I'm joined by my colleagues Alenka Bonner, Christa Schlechten, Sarah Wern, Dario Meloni, Paula Beck, Carmen, Jean-Genat, Medea Fuchs, Dominikos, and Ivo Scherer. Now, to the person you're all here to hear from and about, Anab Jain. She's a designer, a futurist, a filmmaker, and many other things. Also, of course, the co-founder of Superflux, the award-winning future forecasting design studio. Anab's works have been exhibited at some of the most discerning venues on the planet, such as MoMA New York and Tate Modern, and she's also a professor at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Now, I said that Superflux was an award-winning studio, and of course they've won many awards, but one of them you've won just last week, the Design Studio of the Year Award. So congratulations on that. And Anab's also, and this is of particular interest to us all, worked with a number of governments and international organizations, such as the Government of the UAE, Innovate UK, the Cabinet Office, and UNDP. Now, from unprecedented technological acceleration to climate change and political unrest and pandemics, I might add, we're living in somewhat precarious times. And the reason why we're here today is because you, Anna, believe that by creating concrete experiences from the future, we can transform decision-making today. Now, that's a bold promise and one that we'd like to explore together. So Anna will share with us why we should listen to these, you've called them, quote, murmurs of future potential, which I love as an expression, and how you use speculative design to turn these huge human challenges into tangible design artifacts. And hopefully we'll also learn what you've learned from working with governments and international organizations around the globe. Anna, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks everyone, Staatslabor, for inviting me, and thanks everyone for joining, taking up your lunch hour, hopefully in a useful way. I believe you're going to go into breakout sessions, but just before that, I thought I will kick off with a quote from one of my favorite authors, Ursula Le Guin. Her work is very inspiring. She's one of the kind of prolific speculative fiction writers. And she says that the most powerful tool is the imagination, the ability and willingness to imagine alternatives to reality as we know it, which is always the first step towards making different and better realities possible. And so, inspired by the work of Le Guin and many others, our studio, Superflux, works at the kind of boundaries of foresight and scenario making and futures work. We say that, we believe that our embodied, our minds and our bodies are key connected organisms in decision making. It's not just rational scientific thinking. So we say that alongside strategy and statistics and scenarios and models and forecasting, we need imagination and speculation and world building and narrative and experiences to be able to do holistic decision making. And so I kind of want to put everyone in that frame of mind before we get into our breakout rooms. But thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Anab. We'll start off in just a minute by having a look at three of your works. They're all visual and experiential, and so we've prepared a couple of images and videos to show all of you what these murmurs of future potential and these imaginaries look like. And then I've got one or two questions I'd like to ask you, Anab, then mainly around your work with governments and why you believe that creating these experiences can transform decision making. And then, of course, we're keen to have a conversation with all of you. Now, we'd like to start by having a look at some of your works, Anab, and I'll ask Sarah to share her screen, and then we'll start with the first one called Invocation for Hope. What do we see here?
So this is a resurgent forest, which is situated in the central hall of the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna. It was part of their exhibition called Climate Care for the Vienna Biennale 2021. The project is part of what is one of many experiential productions we've created for Creatures EU, which is a Horizon 2020 funded program with 12 to 15 different partner organizations. It is a story of renewal told through the glimpse of a resurgent forest. So visitors are invited to walk through the remains of a burnt forest which has been destroyed by the wildfires. And when they come to the center of it, they find themselves in the heart of a multi-species resurgent forest. So the idea is to tell the story of our journey from a destructive or an extractive relationship to nature towards a more resurgent one. We worked with the forest about an hour from Vienna, which was destroyed by a wildfire, and with the local fire and forest department salvaged the pine trees and brought them to the museum.
If we go to the next image, we see a detailed shot of what's inside this forest.
Yes. So in the heart of the forest, there's a glimpse of what we are calling an interdependent tentacular flourishing, a glimpse of hope. You've hornbeam and apple and silver birch and mounds of biodiversity where mosses and grasses and lichen and shrubs grow symbiotically together over the course of the installation. And that sort of relationship between a burnt forest, which is a monoculture forest, where a lot of our forests have actually become agricultural forests, get destroyed much quicker in fires, towards the center where actually forests grow in a multi-species codependent manner. That's the story we want to tell of our relationship with other species, and to shift perspective from having a very kind of extractive relationship with nature to one where we live in harmony. There's a pond in the heart of this forest, and when you look into the pond, you don't see your own reflection, but you see the reflection of other species looking back at you, whether it's a bison or a ferret or a different kind of alpine species. So this is kind of you having a moment of reflection by seeing a glimpse of another species in the pond is a kind of, for us, this was a poetic, meditative moment.
Now, if we go to the next slide, we have a video that shows some of the scale and some of the details as well of this. And these trees, they're actual trees that were burnt in an actual forest fire.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was in the Neunkirchen region of Austria. One of the main contributors to the spread of wildfires is an approach to forestry that prioritizes monocultures as a means of maximizing yield. Single species forests burn faster. As a result of this kind of human attempt to exert control over nature, the fire-blackened forest serves as a synecdoche for anthropologic climate change in general. So that's the kind of journey we were inviting visitors to take.
What kind of reactions have you gotten from people that have walked through the installation?
Yeah, that's really important, because as it was the part of the Creatures Horizon project, we had quite in-depth researchers working with us who did in-depth research. And I think it's been really interesting. Most people were obviously, were quite moved, I would say. We've had a lot of positive responses. We've had people who come back again and again, people who wanting to, a lot of people first thought that trees were not real. There was a woman who was running a petition to not let the forest leave the museum ever. So it was interesting. There was a sense that people, even for people who are aware of the challenges we face around climate crisis, the kind of emotional and experiential simulation of a forest, but of the relationship between a dead and a living forest, proved very evocative and meaningful.
Now, I suggest we go to the next piece. So that is or was Invocation for Hope, Refuge for Resurgence. What do we see here?
So again, these two projects, this is also from the Creatures Horizon 2020 grant. And again, this is a kind of direction that the studio is taking, where we are trying to create and craft new or alternative myths and narratives to explore how storytelling, narrative, fiction, and myth making can encourage us towards new relationships with the planet, and to move us towards renewal. So in this instance, it's a symbolic banquet. It's a multi-species banquet set after what we are calling the end of the world as we know it. The banquet attendees represent a cross-section of life on a resurgent Earth, including species that were once domesticated or considered to be pests or vermin, but are now reclaiming their rightful place in the ecological order. So there are 14 plate settings around this table, which include 2 human adults and a human child, but there also include a wild boar, a wolf, a snake, a wasp, a beaver, a cow, a fox, a pigeon, a rat, a raven, as you can see, and even fungi. So they've all been invited, and they've been given a seat alongside humans on the same table, which is a symbolic way of saying that we need to start shifting our perspectives and treat other species with that level of respect, because without the bee and the lichen and the wolf, humanity cannot survive.
Now, if we go to the next slide, we see a detail of that table setting. Who's sitting at this? Whose placemat is this?
This is the wasps' placemat. And the wasps, each of them have an illustration which talks about their journey in this renewal. And they have tools, cutlery, which we think they will use for eating, and a food offering. So the wasps' scoop, honey dipper, and feather brush are constructed using jewelry making processes and made of brass, cotton twine, and a guinea fowl feather. The brass scoop is made from a vintage tea caddy spoon, once a symbol of wealth and status. The dipper is modeled on honey dipper for serving sweet sugary liquids to adult wasps. The guinea fowl feather brush delicately collects insects, living and carcasses, as offerings for the wasp's larvae.
Wow. How did you come up with the idea of the table and the dinner?
Sure. So a lot of our work over the last few years has been exploring what does climate change mean in an everyday life, and we've done a lot of that exploration through domestic settings. So to understand that this hyper object that is climate change, when we see graphs, when people don't see themselves in those graphs, and so the idea was, how do we bring it down to everyday life? And so we've been working with the home a lot, and this was an evolution of that home. In this case, it's a deconstructed home, so you still have remnants of that. You see a window, and you look outside the window, you see a rewilded city. And inside the home, the key feature is the space where people gather around food, which we think is really important, because we really treasure our kind of in all cultures, treasure eating together and dining together. So that was the key idea of food. And then we were considering what would it mean to dine inside a home, which is different from how. And so our really interest was to start to shift perspectives. And obviously a wolf is not going to sit next to a human child and dine together ever. But what would it mean to give that level of respect? Sorry.
You mentioned climate change, and you've also mentioned technology. If we go to the next and final example, we see Mitigation of Shock. Now, the first two works, and correct me if you disagree with this, sort of emphasize the relationship between nature and species and the interdependence. Whereas what this work adds is the whole question around technology, which is something you've also worked on a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the work, which is an apartment in London in around 2050 or so. We looked at a lot of climate data. We talked to a lot of scientists and did an extrapolation scenario, one possible future where, the home has been modified to adapt to the changes of climate. So in this instance, we made fully working food computers using easily accessible, cheap tools and salvaged materials. We had Arduino sensors and ultrasonic fog making machines that helped grow food quickly indoors using just water, no nutrient fog, rather, no soil or water. So the idea here is to understand that human ingenuity and innovation could play a key role in helping us thrive in an uncertain future, but it would require huge levels of mitigation and adaptation, but also imagination to start to understand how forces that seem outside of our control could start having an impact on domestic life. So yes, we have explored a lot of different technological artifacts and tools that come to bear in this future.
If we go to the next image, there's an incredible level of detail in this apartment. This is, I suppose, a newspaper from 2050. Mm-hmm. If we go to the next one, we've got a video where we sort of get an idea of what this apartment looks like. And maybe you can talk us through what we're seeing there.
Sure. So, this installation, it transports you into a London flat, perhaps around 2050 or so. And I like to say when my son would be around my age, so it's very directly connected to, our everyday lives. At first glance, a seemingly comfortable living space designed for a world of automated living, global trade, and material abundance. But then as people started looking closer, you realize that it's been adapted to a future it wasn't meant to inhabit. Discarded newspapers, radio show start to reflect the tensions of this new world. People are foraging and adapting, creating new recipes from what is available locally and within the community groups. So we are emphasizing the importance of local community collaborations as well. You see this kind of smart panel which constantly asks the fridge, smart fridge, to refill milk, but where is the milk in this future? And then you kind of keep going further into the, you have books like Pets as Protein, How to Cook in Scarcity, and you start to realize that amongst the detritus of now obsolete smart devices, there is a new reality. Recipes in the kitchen reflect this change in food production and consumption. As you turn around the corner, the large part of the apartment has been taken over by experimental food production, transforming the apartment into a space for growing and producing food. Resourcefully hacked together consumer items, IKEA shelves, decorative fog makers, computer fans, programmable microcontrollers, plumbing supplies, LED lamps, purple fog oozing out of these contraptions. There's the droning sound of water pipes. You can hear children running up the stairs in the background. Mycelium, vegetables, algae, spirulina, worms, all kind of starting to bear fruit in what we are saying, the blasted ruins of capitalism.
Well, thank you for narrating us through this in such an evocative way. Thank you, Sarah. We can stop the screen sharing at this point. There's two things I want to follow up on. One is you said, this describes a future, but you're quite clear that this isn't meant to be a prediction. Can you say more about that?
So, I mean, so Genevieve Bell, who's like an anthropologist who was a vice president at Intel, once said that a data can only tell you what is, and so through the work, what we are doing in many ways is what you might call generating speculative evidence of different possible futures, because by looking at data sets, by talking to climate scientists, it is becoming evident, the more you talk to climate scientists, is that there are many possible futures out there, and extrapolations can get us this far, but by generating speculative evidences, as you saw in the apartment, can enable us to maybe not shift but expand our Overton windows to include possibilities that we may not have otherwise included. And today that becomes more important than ever. So that's the kind of underlying role of a lot of the work. What you've shown is artistic explorations. A lot of our other work is working with a bit more focused briefs with, for instance, governments. I can share a quick project if that makes sense, or up to you.
So of course, that'd be great.
Maybe I'll just share my screen and give an example of a project that I think might make it more clear that, for instance, we were invited by the Ministry of Energy and Prime Minister's Office and the government of UAE to help them create the energy strategy all the way up to 2050. And what we were given was a set of 4 econometric models. And they actually had 5 scenarios, from business as usual to extreme investment in renewable energy. And that required a significant shift in lifestyle and investment that I'm not sure they were prepared to make. So our role was to kind of sway that decision towards higher investment in renewables. The policymakers wanted that. So when we were to present to the Prime Minister, we created this large city model, this crystal city model, and started to visualize many possible future scenarios on this model, including kind of their happiness index, which they care deeply about. You can see my slides, can't you? Yeah.
We can see your screen.
Great. So as I was talking, the government ministry members, also members of individual energy companies through this kind of model with these 5 scenarios animated and brought to life, one of the participants told me, you know, I cannot imagine why you've got so much public transport here. We love our cars. I can't even tell my own son to stop driving his car. So we were prepared for this reaction. Alongside this large scale model, we had created small, what I was calling speculative evidences. So we walked these people over to this ultrasonic sensor, which was emitting polluted air from 2036. So we had worked with scientists to generate an approximate sample of how polluted the air would be if no investments were made in renewable, if we continued life as is, business as usual. And that was a really noxious sample of air. And only a few days later, they announced large investments in renewable energy. They went up to the scenario 4. They did not go full 100%, but scenario 4, 756 billion dirhams were invested in their 2050 energy strategy. And I'm not saying that it was that kind of just that kind of experiential simulation that propelled them into this decision, but in combination with the data that was available, that experiential, moving, emotional connection with the idea that this is not the air I would allow my children or grandchildren to breathe. No amount of data can do that. So there is that relationship that we really like to explore. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a ton, Anab. That's a very evocative example and very incredibly visual and easy to imagine what this might feel like. One question I have is, you've talked about the experiential nature of this, and you've also talked about, in other places, about the importance of building the thing. And you mentioned that these these boxes in Mitigation of Shock that grow food, they're actually functioning. So these are not, they're not sort of fancy imitations, that this is the real thing. This actually works in a sense. Why is it so important to actually build the thing? Because I imagine it's an incredible amount of work. It'd be much easier to just build something that looks like the actual thing, but isn't the actual thing. Why does it make a difference?
That's a really good question. So a lot of our practice started by looking at technology, and with technology especially, there is a hype. So one of the projects we've done a while ago was around drones, and we said we need to build the drones to see the talk about the promises. And there is this kind of the hype of the technological hype that you see in many of the graphs. We want to question that, because the minute you start actually investigating the materiality of a lot of these things, you realize there's a big gap between the and the actually what is possible to deliver. And we were really interested in the credibility of the future scenarios that we are exploring. The future for us is as much a material as much as a construct or an idea, and exploring it materially means you understand the drawbacks and the kind of lack of potential that is being promised, or the potential that already exists. Like, you say, okay, we've got sensors, we've got this pieces of wood. You could actually, with some amount of instructions and guidance, build a fully working food computer. What does that tell about the ingenuity that exists all around us that could be harnessed towards a really interesting, flourishing future? So I think it's really important to get hands into the process of crafting a possible future for us that makes it possible in a way that a render remains shiny and glossy and often blue in color.
Thank you. I have many more questions, but I'd like to open up the conversation now, and I imagine that many of you will have both questions and comments, both about the sort of the artistic side of things and the evocative nature of your works, Anna, but then also the more, in a sense, pragmatic applications of these things in a government context, given that all of us here, that is the one question that we carry around most of the day, you know, how can we make government work better? How can we do our jobs in government better? Before we do that,